Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about troubleshooting CCAux issues. So I've created two previous videos, one describing the CCAux platform in general within the Lynx software system and how it is the interface to the hardware on our CCpilot devices. And the second one, we went through a quick QT demonstration showing how to actually use one of the CCAux functions for the buzzer within a QT application. So if you haven't watched those videos, please go watch those videos. But in this video, I'll talk a little bit about issues that sometimes arise when trying to use CCAux and some things to check for to get around those issues. So we'll start in the virtual machine. So I would say the issues tend to be two separate categories. One, it could be an issue during your build process. So you don't even try to load it onto a display, but you're trying to put a CCAux function such as, these buzzer functions into your program. And in QT, when you hit build, you get some errors. So in this case, it's most likely an issue with versioning between the header files and the library files installed on the display. And we talked a little bit about where those were in the previous video, but let's look back at those right now and talk about what you can do to potentially resolve that issue. So we looked here we included this buzzer.h, or we're including the header files that we want in our project. So in our case, we wanted to work with the buzzer and we included buzzer.h. And we also looked at, in our .pro file, the include path. So these are opt.exe include and opt.exe user include. So if we open our file browser, go to opt.exe include, we'll see the different header files. So we could find the buzzer.h header file that we're using, and we'll see here the version that this header file is. So this is the CCAux version that we're using. So one of the things that could happen is you essentially want to try to make sure the header file version you're using and the CCAux library version you're using are matched up. So you can see here we're using 280, and if we look back in our QT application, our library path is opt.exe user include. So if we come here, opt.exe lib is the library path. Opt.exe user lib, not include. And we'll come to lib. So I briefly showed in the last video how to search for the CCAux libraries, but they're called libcc-aux. And we could use the star character as a wild character. So here are I'm going to expand this a bit. And here are the libraries. So we can see in our virtual machine, we have the shared objects or libraries installed, the CCAux library 283. So this is the most up-to-date one for our VCVA displays, and I kind of briefly showed how to look at what each display was using, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this video. But essentially our header file is using 280, and I'm going to come back here to opt.exe include. So we saw when we looked at our buzzer header file, it was 280. So as I sort of mentioned before, these are backwards compatible. So we generally will add functions and features as versions go on, but we attempt not to change the already existing ones. So if we're using a header file of 280 and we're using a library that is greater, we're using 283 library, that generally won't give us an issue, but we could think about updating our header files. And I'll talk about where to get those in 1 second. But the problems usually arise if we're using a library version less than our header version. So if, for instance, our library version that we were actually using was 273, and you can see which one you're using by these green, all of these are symbolic links in the blue, and it's pointing to this one shared object or library file, which is 283. But within the virtual machine, we also have 273, but it's not being used. But if we saw that was being used and we were using a header file greater than that, that could give us issues because in this header file, it may have functions that we'd attempt to use that were not included in 273. And that would give us compiler errors. Essentially, our program would look at the header file and say, yes, I have that function available, and then try to find its implementation in the shared object or library, and it wouldn't be able to find it, and it would cause an error. So in general, you want to make sure that your library version in the opt.exe user lib, or if you're using an XM display, then you'd come down here for the x86 and you can see the library path in that case is opt.lib. So we want to make sure that the library version is greater than or equal to the version we see in our header files. And for this case, we just double clicked, but you could also come into buzzer.h, right click, and you'll see here, sometimes it looks like this, but if we expand it, you'll see, we can also see the version here. Okay, so that is how it should be. So what happens if you do not have the right version in your header files? Where do you find the right versions? So for that, we're going to come to our support site here. And right now I am on the XA page. So I'm in Display Computers XA, but all of the different displays will have something similar. So if we come to the SDK, we'll see the CCAux SDK. And I actually already downloaded this one for 283, but I can go ahead and download 27 something. So if we download this from our support site, pull it open and open it up, we will be able to see this Inc. file system. And these have all of the include files from the version of CCAux that we're interested in. So in this case, we downloaded version 273. But if, for instance, if we were using a VA display, we could come to the VA page, come down to SDK, and we would see the 283 that the VA uses. So you can get the include files from there. And once you have those, essentially you just want to extract this include folder, bring it over to the virtual machine, and within the opt.exe, you'll notice that I've also done this. So I have 283 includes. So I just created a new folder in here and put all of the includes from this include file into that folder. And when I want to use them, I can actually just copy them over and replace the includes in here. So I could do that right now if I wanted to by just coming like this, copying them all, and putting them in here, and I can just say apply to all, overwrite. And now if I were to look at my battery, I'm now using the up-to-date version here. So, and you can, oh, I don't know why it's, there we go. And it also updates in my project, so I could rebuild it and I wouldn't expect any errors, because like I said, I was using a function that's been around in a lot of different versions of CCAux. But okay, so I just showed you guys how you can update the header files to the appropriate version. So if, for instance, you're using our XA display, which from our support site you can see ships normally with CCAux 273, and say you went in the virtual machine and found that you're using the libraries for 283 and you have header files for 283 and you want to instead use 273, you could do what we just did by downloading the SDK, getting the header files, and replacing them in the include directory. So you have the appropriate header files. When you right click, you'll see 273. So that goes over how to replace the header files. So what about the libraries? Okay, so I think the easiest way to replace the libraries in the virtual machine, and I did mention before too that the libraries and header files for that matter are backwards compatible. So if you're using a function in 283, it should work actually on the XA as long as you're not using one of the new functions that was just presented in 283 and then you're trying to use it with 273, if that makes sense. But sometimes it's easiest just to make sure you have the right libraries and header files. So that's what I said. We're going to replace the header with the correct version that you're using on the display, and I'm going to show you how to replace the libraries as well. So the easiest way to do this is actually just pulling them right from the display, so you know you have the same libraries as you do on the display. So here I'm going to log in. I'm using a VC display, so hopefully it won't, should be connected here. So oh, there we go, little lawn. So okay, so I've logged into the VC display. Now the CCAux libraries are generally located in one of two areas. One of them is more common. So if you come to cd/user lib, the CCAux library should normally be located here, but in some of our older releases we actually loaded them into opt lib. So if you don't find any in user lib, you may want to check opt lib. But for this case, mine are in user lib, so I'm going to do that. And then we type the same thing that we did in the virtual machine. So ls-la and then lib cc-aux and star. Okay, so on my display, I can see I am using 290. And I've mentioned this in a previous video. I'm using a later version of an OS, which actually an engineering version, which updates CCAux. But this isn't a problem because I'm using 283 in the virtual machine, and as I said, everything should be backwards compatible. So it actually builds and works because everything in 283 that I'm using on my virtual machine is included in 290. Where you can run into problems though is if you're, for instance, using 283 in your virtual machine and using 273 on your display. So it may build in your virtual machine, but when you try to deploy it to the display, like we have in the previous videos, it may give you an error saying yeah, I don't know exactly what it'll say, but it'll give you potentially some sort of error. I believe calling out CCAux or usually I think one of the CCAux libraries, it'll probably flag an error saying that there's a problem with the library, it can't find it or something. So in that case, that's because you're using a function or a library in your virtual machine that is not available on your display. So in this case, the easiest thing to do is simply copy the libraries from your display to your virtual machine and build with those. So to do that, we are going to say tar and then cf, or I think of it as create file, and the name of the live or the tar file. So I'm going to call this CCAux 29.tar, and then all of the files that you want. So I want all of the lib cc-aux star files here. And star, like I said, is a wild character, so it doesn't, anything after the X, it will grab. So you don't really need to know exactly what it does, but right. So if you get this, we are going to say we're going to change the file system to a read file system, a read-write. So mount -o, remount, read-write, and change everything. So you can just copy down what I typed in there and try this again. And there we go. So it created the file. So if we say lsccaux 2_9 star, we should see our tar file here. Okay, so once we have that, we want to grab this file from the display and put it in one of our library folders. So we're gonna hold this back for a second and let's come to opt.exe user, and you'll see I've actually already done this for the 283 libraries. So here we go, I have all of those. I have the XA library, so I have copies because I use multiple displays. So for instance, if I'm using an XA, I might have to revert to these libraries, whereas if I'm using a VA or VC or one of our ones with an updated CCAux, I can use these libraries. So in this case, though, we're going to copy the file that we just created on the display, this tar file, to this folder. So I'm going to say the file I want to copy, so that's root. So I'm going to copy it off of the display, so give it the IP address, 2.21, and then the location that it's at. So this is in user lib, and we called it CCAux 2_9.tar. And I'm actually just going to copy it to this location, so /exa/user in my virtual machines. Let's see if this works. For some reason the connection to the display is seems to be running a little slow, but there we go. So it worked. So there are the files that the tar file I made, and you'll see those have our 2.9 libraries in them. So if I were to, for instance, copy this into my lib folder here and extract it, it would overwrite the 283 files here. And you'll notice I have a bunch of, I have lib CCAux 283, so I can do this just for demonstration. So I'm going to put this folder in my lib. Say move here, and I called that CCAux 2.9 something, I think. What did I call that? CCAux 2_9. Ah, no underscore there. There we go. So if I say tar extract file CCAux29.tar, and so I've extracted that, and now I look at my CCAux files again, you'll notice now I have the 2.9, so the same libraries that I have on my display are now on my virtual machine. So as we discussed before, the issue could here, maybe that I do not have the 2.9.0 header files. I only have 2.8.3 header files. So that could cause me some issues. I would prefer to have the header files here on my virtual machine that match the libraries on my virtual machine. So since the VC is actually right now the only display that's updated to this 2.9, I'm gonna turn it back to the 2.8.3, and we can see that, interesting. Fix a user. I did not want to extract them here. That was my fault. I should have put it in lib. Alright, let's try that again. Alright, so I'm still using the 2.8.3 because now I'm in lib. So let's just try to extract the same things, and it'll do the same thing though. So now you'll see in my lib folder all of my libraries are pointing to 2.9.0, which I want, and here I have the 2.9.0 library. But you'll notice I also have other tar files which contain the libraries for CCAux 2.8.3, 2.7.3, because like I said, I use different displays so I can extract the ones that I need at the time depending on the display I'm using. So, in this case, I've successfully copied the libraries from my display to my virtual machine to make sure we're using the same ones. In my case, though, like I said, I'm going to turn it back to 2.8.3 because that's primarily what I'm using, and I don't want to mess up my virtual machine here. So, and so I just extracted a tar file that contained all of the 2.8.3 libraries, and now if I search again, I'm back to 2.8.3. So it's pretty easy to switch between the ones that you want if you know what you're doing. Like I said, I would just, for you guys, I would try to make sure the ones that you find on your display match what's in your virtual machine, and the libraries that you have in your virtual machine match the version that you have in your header files. And you can get the header files. If the versions don't match, you can grab the header files from our support site on the SDK. So, again, for me, I maintain different header files for different versions right in my folder, just to have them ready. I will say I've tried to change the path. So I've sometimes tried to change the include path or the library path, and I've had varying success with it. I don't know. Sometimes it's like I can't get the make file to recompile, or the code to recompile versus on a new make file. So just be a little careful. You can try to change, for instance, your library path or your include path if you would like to say include 2.8.3 or add it. But if you run into problems, then I would just recommend using the include path already there and overwriting the files like we talked about. Okay, so I think that covers it. If those match up, if your header files are the same version as the library files in your virtual machine, which are the same version as the library files in your display, then that is usually the #1 issue people have with CCAux. So If you can confirm those are correct, I believe that should solve 90-something% of the issues. The only other thing to maybe keep in mind is that to make sure you're not using a function that is not available for the display you're using. So I mentioned in the previous video, all of our functions have something called supported platforms along with them. So even if, for instance, you have 283 or 29 installed on the display, if you're using a function that is not supported in that platform, you're going to get an error. So, that's also something to check, is make sure that if you're running into issues with it, that in the supported platforms that the display you're using is called out in the function you're attempting to use within CCAux. Okay, I think that covers troubleshooting. Hopefully this was informative, and stay tuned for other videos. Thanks.